Malaysia, a country with beautiful skyscrapers and quiet kampongs, of golden malls shining in the sun and bustling Chinese night markets alive with energy, of vibrant Indian temples, weathered colonial buildings, and endless stretches of green plantations. To the outside world, it's a tropical paradise. But behind the perfect image lies an old question, a dangerous question. Who does this land really belong to? The Malay says, "It's ours. We are the founding race, the son of the soil, and the heirs of the sultans and warriors." The Chinese and Indians say, "We built this land too. Our blood, our sweat, our families have been here for centuries. We are not outsiders." And from this clash between Ketuanan Melayu, the supremacy of the Malays, and Malaysian Malaysia, equality for all, comes the story of how this nation was truly formed. Our story begins around the year 1400. Traditional Malay chronicles such as the Sejarah Melayu attribute its founding to the figure named Parameswara. Modern historians treat the Sejarah Melayu as valuable but not strictly literal. And the story goes like this. Parameswara was a nobleman from Palembang who fled from the chaos in his state by sea. He then took shelter at a place called Temasek, what we now call Singapore, where he briefly tried to seize power, only to be forced out again by forces loyal to Siam and Majapahit. Pursued, hunted, desperate, he pushed north along the Malay Peninsula, and there, in the early 1400s, he found a sheltered estuary rich with mangroves, fresh water, and a safe anchorage, a place where trade winds converge, a crossroads of the seas, all at the foot of a nearby hill that allowed one to observe the coming and going of ships. This place is called Melaka. Here, Parameswara immediately knew that Malacca would make an ideal port that could both service trade and project military power. At first, Malacca was simply a small fishing village. Parameswara then forged a bond with the nomadic Orang Laut to create a safe harbor for passing ships. He then understood something vital. With great alliances comes great power. Malacca's reputation spread like wildfire across the Sea of Asia, a place where trade was safe, orderly, and profitable. Protected by the fierce Orang Laut, merchants knew their goods would be secure the moment they docked. Parameswara's system was revolutionary. Clear taxes, no hidden bribes, and no petty corruption. There were 4 harbor masters in charge of different groups of traders. Above them was one top official, whose job was to settle arguments between groups and make sure trade stayed peaceful and fair. Within a few years, Malacca became the most important trading center in Southeast Asia. The Straits of Malacca were the beating heart of Asian trade. Chinese brought silk and porcelain. Arabs and Gujarati merchants carried spices, textiles, and ideas. To thrive, Parameswara needed their trust. And here, Islam entered the story. By the late 14th and early 15th century, Islam was spreading rapidly across the Indian Ocean. Muslim merchants dominated long-distance trade. Thus, a port that welcomes Muslims could become part of this immersed commercial world. So, Parameswara did what many in his position would do. He adopted Islamic royal titles and forged marriage ties with Muslim royal families, though it remained uncertain whether he ever converted to Islam. During the reign of his son, the ruler of Malacca converted to Islam. He took on the name Sultan Iskandar Shah. With that, Malacca was now a Muslim sultanate. Conversion linked Malacca to the wider Muslim world, earning recognition from powerful allies. Muslim traders now favored Malacca, making it a premier entry port of Southeast Asia. The Chinese Ming dynasty too extended recognition, protecting Malacca against Siamese and Javanese threats. This was the turning point. Before Malacca, the word Melayu referred to scattered people across Sumatra and the peninsula. After Malacca, it began to mean something more, a political, cultural, and religious community bound together by the Sultan, the Malay language, and the Islamic faith. By the early 16th century, Malacca had grown into a thriving port, strategically located, commercially powerful, and culturally vibrant. Merchants from China, India, Arabia, and beyond crowded its market. The city was a jewel of Southeast Asia, but wealth also attracts envy. In 1511, Portuguese forces under Alfonso set their sights on Malacca. Their goal was clear: control the straits and dominate Asia trade, cutting out intermediaries like Venice that profited from the spice trade. Alfonso's vision combined commerce and conquest, a strategy shaped by both the European crusading legacy and a sophisticated understanding of global trade networks. Portuguese at that time was a ruthless force. Thus, after weeks of bombardment, Malacca fell. The Sultan fled, seeking refuge inland. The Portuguese then imposed a new order, reshaping trade and exerting their authority. Most were destroyed or repurposed into churches, and European control dominated the urban core. Yet, even under foreign rule, Malay identity persisted. Beyond the city walls, villages maintained language, custom, and Islamic practices. The Sultanate Institute survived in exile, keeping alive the symbolic authorities of Malay Muslim rulership. Over the next century, wars with neighboring sultanates like Johor and Aceh repeatedly tested Portuguese authorities. Missionary efforts, including the activities of Saint Francis Xavier, largely failed to convert the population. In many ways, Portuguese oppression strengthened Islamic identity, giving local communities a unifying cause against foreign domination. By the time the Dutch replaced the Portuguese, Malacca had become a cautionary tale and a beacon. The city's political structure had been disrupted, yet the core of Malay Muslim identity, language, faith, and loyalty to the Sultanate endured. This resilience mattered. When the British arrived centuries later, they encountered a population already conscious of its history and heritage. Malacca's legacy had taught a lasting lesson. Ruler may fall, power may change, but cultural and religious identity can survive. So came the late 18th century. The British had established a foothold in the Malay Peninsula. First Penang, then Singapore, and later parts of Malacca and the peninsula itself became part of British colonial network. The empire's goal was clear: trade, security, and strategic control of Southeast Asia's maritime corridors. But colonial rule did more than impose European authority. It reshaped the social and demographic landscape. To support trade and extract resources, the British encouraged large-scale migration. Chinese laborers arrived to work in tin mines and urban commerce. Indians were bought as laborers on plantations. These groups settled across the peninsula, establishing communities that would endure for generations. The Malays, by contrast, were primarily rural, living in kampongs, tending rice fields, and following traditional sultanate authority structures, even if those sultanates now had limited political power under colonial rule. This created a dual reality. The Malay population retained its historical identity, steeped in Islam, language, and customs, while immigrants' community contributed to the emerging multicultural urban economy. Over decades, this demographic shift intensifies Malay consciousness. The Malay began to see themselves as the original people of the peninsula, heirs of the sultans that predated British rule. In contrast, Chinese and Indian migrants, despite generations of settlement, were often viewed as outsiders. Colonial policies reinforced this perception. The British implemented ethnic-based administrative system, favoring Chinese and Indian labor in commerce and plantations, while Malay were encouraged to remain in agriculture. Education, legal codes, and political participation were structured along ethnic lines. The result was a plural society. Each ethnic group occupied a defined economy and social niche, and within this framework, Malay elites and communities began to articulate a new political consciousness. that the Malay were not just people, but the founding community whose rights, language, and religion deserve recognition, a precursor to what would later be called Ketuanan Melayu. It was a society of contrasts, prosperity and displacement, integration and exclusion, colonial order and local tradition. And it was in this crucible, centuries after Parameswara and Melaka, that the idea of Malay homeland within a multi-ethnic peninsula took firm root. Even as British rule advanced, the legacy of Malacca endured. The Malay language, Islamic faith, though weakened politically, they remain a source of identity and resilience. The arrival of immigrant communities may have challenged Malay dominance economically, but it also reinforced the sense of historical and spiritual entitlement. The Malays were the original custodians of the land, but by the 20th century, the Malay Peninsula had become a patchwork of communities shaped by centuries of migration, trade, and conquest. And in this mosaic, one reality stood out: the Malays' sense of primacy, not just of numbers, but of history, culture, and faith. From the founding of Malacca to colonial rule, identity had survived, and with it, the seed of future political movement would emerge. Movement that would argue in the 20th century that the land, its institutions, and its destiny belong first and foremost to the Malays. World War II had left Malaya battered. Japanese occupation had exposed the vulnerabilities of colonial rule and awakened nationalist sentiment. After 1945, the British returned, seeking to streamline administration and secure economic control. Their solution was the Malayan Union, a bold plan that would unify the Malay states under a single administration, with liberal citizenship law designed to integrate Chinese and Indian residents fully into the political system. On paper, it was a step towards modernization. In practice, it ignited Malay fears. For the first time in centuries, the British were proposing equal citizenship, challenging century-old notions of Malay primacy tied to sultans, the Malay language, and Islam. Malay elites led by UMNO mobilized across the peninsula. Massive rallies, petitions, and protests erupted, with the message of Malaya belongs to the Malay first. The Malayan Union, short-lived as it is, solidified a political narrative that the Malays were the indigenous, rightful rulers of the land, and the others, particularly the Chinese and Indians, were guests, vital economically but politically subordinate. This was the birth of Ketuanan Melayu, codified not only politically but eventually in law. By 1948, the British replaced the Malayan Union with the Federation of Malaya, granting special rights to the Malays. These measures preserved Malay political dominance while accommodating the realities of a plural society. Chinese, Indians, and other groups retained economic roles, but political power was codified as Malay-led. Independence in 1957 marked the culmination of centuries of history, but the story was far from over. The foundation of Ketuanan Melayu clashed with visions of Malaysian Malaysia, a society where ethnicity would not dictate rights or privilege. Championed by political leaders who sought equality from all citizens regardless of race. Here lies the central tension of modern Malaysia, the promise of multi-ethnic nation versus the reality of ethno-religious entitlements. The Malays' historical claims forged over centuries through Malacca's Sultanate, Islamic identity, and colonial struggles continued to influence policy and politics. The Chinese and Indians, despite centuries in the peninsula, are still often cast as economic partners but not political equals. From the tides of history, migration, conquest, a nation was formed. The Malays claimed the mantle of founding people rooted in centuries of political and religious authority. The Chinese and Indians built their place as contributors to economy and society. And through it all, the debate continues between Malay supremacy and equal citizenship. Malaysia is a country full of history. It begins with a fugitive prince crossing the Straits of Malacca, setting the stage for Malacca's rise as a bustling Muslim sultanate. Colonial power arrived next. Portuguese, Dutch, and the British reshaped society. Yet, through it all, Malay culture endured. Language, Islam, and loyalty to the sultanates survived in villages, courts, and communal memory. Then came waves of Chinese and Indian migrations, transforming cities, plantations, and railways. The Malays retained political and cultural primacy, while Chinese dominated trade and Indians built the backbone of the economy. These divisions, practical under colonial rule, would sow seeds of tension that echoed to this day. Independence in 1957 didn't erase history, it codified it. The idea of Ketuanan Melayu, Malay political dominance rooted in centuries of survival, clashed with the vision of a Malaysian Malaysia, where equality might transcend ethnicity. Malaysia's story is a delicate negotiation between past and present, a nation built on resilience, survival, and the relentless question of belonging. The Chinese and Indian communities long integrated to the country are still often seen as outsiders. And in the tension, the push and pull between history and aspiration lies the essence of Malaysia itself. Alright guys, thanks for watching to the end. History are often written by winners, and there is always two sides in a story, and both sides might be right. Anyways, and as always, have a great one and peace out.